Hey ladies and gentlemen, again, sorry I can't be with you guys there today, as I'm out today, but hopefully through these narrations and going through it together, it saves time because we won't have to go through it all tomorrow, and I make sure that you get all of the material that you would get if I were normally in class today. So as I told you yesterday, we're continuing our conversation on looking at those push and pull factors of migration, where yesterday we focused on the political and social push and pull factors and the two different historical examples of the Mongols and the Crusades. Today we're going to shift our focus to the economic and the geographic/environmental push and pull factors of migration using two new historical examples. So you want to make sure that you are open up to page 11 in your packets, starting off with the new round of notes. You also want to make sure that you take note of the homework for tonight. So you will have another post for Google Classroom that's going to ask you basically the same question as yesterday that you had to respond to, but utilizing the content from today. So make sure you do that. If you finish these early in class today, you can work on that when you're done. Otherwise, make sure you do that tonight. Also, as you are going through these notes, the advantage to it being narrated is that you can pause me to make sure you're getting that information written down. So I am not going to teach this now as I would normally in class, which is giving you time and breaks to write things down. I'm just going to go straight through. So then you need to make sure to pause and get the information written down, and then resume when you're ready to move on. Okay, everybody ready? Okay, here we go. So when we look at the push and pull factors of the economic push and pull factors, we're really looking at three things in terms of push. One, as you guys highlighted in your own conversation that we had last week, looking at those loss of jobs. So job opportunity is a huge motivator. So if the economy is declining, I know some classes highlighted like high taxation or a large debt, some type of natural disaster, something that happens that causes a loss of jobs and economic decline, that's going to be a big motivator to push people out. Some of this could come from poor trade, where you are having a lot of tariffs on trade that is reducing your ability to sell your goods, and so you need to move somewhere else where you can sell your goods better. Or in some cases, you have flooded markets. So where we look at some places around the world where goods from other countries are flooding their economy. And so if I am a farmer or a manufacturer in that country and I can't get a fair price for my crop that I'm growing or my good that I'm making here because somebody else's goods are flooding my market and they're cheaper, I'm going to look to move somewhere else where I can have better trade opportunities and better job opportunities and income. And lastly, we have their serfdom. Serfdom is the concept of almost like slavery, but without the chattel. So you're not necessarily, tied to the person or tied to the land in the same way that we would have seen slaves here in the United States. But it is a form of servitude where you are kept in a state of relying on your master, the head of your estate that you live on, for your economic viability, and you really had no social or economic mobility. You couldn't really rise out of that status unless they completely changed the way that society functioned and they got rid of serfdom and moved to more of a market economy. And so that's going to be a large motivator for people to leave and have more economic freedom to make the decisions for themselves, rather than being really tied to somebody else. Pull factors, as we noted yesterday, are going to be the complementary elements. So if you are living somewhere because of an economic decline or loss of jobs, you want to move somewhere where they are experiencing economic prosperity, economic growth, booming job opportunities. And so better jobs, more wealth, so meaning that the income that you're getting paid for that job is higher. Those are all going to be huge pull factors that's going to pull people into certain places. Our historical example that we're going to utilize for this concept is European exploration. Now we're going to talk about European exploration going back for a second. We'll talk more about European exploration. That's going to be really the focus for your end of the unit assessment. And so tomorrow, we're going to begin actually researching information for our end of the unit assessment as we start to look at what were the push and pull factors specifically for Europeans to the Americas, which I just kind of went over some of it for you, but there's a lot more information beyond the economic element that you're going to investigate. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it now, just because that's going to focus so much of our work for this unit. So then lastly, our geographic or environmental push factors are those things that you guys, again, highlighted last week: drought, disease, famine, natural disasters. Understanding that famine and drought can be natural disasters and be brought upon by natural disasters. Natural disasters in the form of hurricanes, that climate variability, right? We talked about that. Those, that's a typo, womp womp. It should say early geographic pull factors included herding, like going where there was better herding opportunities for cattle, more fertile soil. So like the Greeks, where you have 80% of your soil being rocky mountainous region, you're going to want to move somewhere where you have better favorable climate and soil to grow your crops on. So that's going to be a large motivator. And the group that we're going to talk about in terms of the geographic and environmental historical example are the Norse. The Norse are a group of Scandinavian warriors. So think Norway, think Sweden, think Denmark, right? The northern portions of Europe, which is interesting. So when you look at records of like Englishmen and French referring to the Norse, they often refer to them as the Northmen because they were the Norsemen, and it kind of became Northmen because they came from the north. You know them more commonly, or you've heard of them more commonly as Vikings. And we have to understand that the word Viking specifically means pirate. So you're specifically talking about the Norsemen who went on raiding parties, okay, that went on those raiding expeditions to find land, to pillage, to take gold. That is what the term Viking means. So when we talk about Vikings, we are not talking about all of the people who lived in those northern regions that are on the boats, okay? Also, fun fact, they didn't actually wear like the hat with the horns on it. That's a modern creation, a modern media movie, Hollywood creation. So the Norse is who we are focusing on because they are the ones who are desiring of more land and better land than what they had. But it's the Vikings who are going to carry that out for them. And so they are going to raid a variety of different places. They're going to raid Northern Europe. So England, Ireland, France, we have a lot of records specifically from the church about the raiding parties that the Vikings are going to engage in on monasteries and churches. We know that they made it as far as Western Asia, that they went into the Mediterranean, and that they will sail through there and they will trade with the Italians. They will make it to the area that we refer to as the Middle East. So we do know that they do raid as far as there, and that they do engage in trade with those groups. And then we do know that they did make it to Eastern North America. Leif Erikson is going to make it to Eastern North America well before Columbus makes it here. And so we do know that they went to all of these different places in search of land. As we talked about, they're going to move further and further west in search of better land opportunities, in search of more fertile soil. The Norse were for farmers, like most people at this time. But they are going to constantly be in the search of better land opportunities. So they're going to settle into Iceland in about 860 Common Era. Sorry, friends, got interrupted, but that's okay. Got a little scared by somebody walking into the office. So they're going to settle in Iceland in 860 Common Era, later to Greenland, and then again to parts of Eastern North America. The Swedes are going to lead them east. So the Swedes are going to settle in regions around the Baltic Sea, so Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Russia. In fact, we'll look at how the Norse are actually responsible for Russia having its name today. So the Norwegians are going to head west. The Swedes are going to head to the east. You have other groups that are going to head south into England and into France. And as we talked about, the Vikings are going to reach North America about 500 years before Columbus does, which begs the question, Columbus Day or Leif Erikson Day? If you're a fan of SpongeBob, you know that he chooses the latter and likes to call it Leif Erikson Day, but I'll leave that up to you as you have that day off on Monday to decide which one you're going to call it, or Indigenous Peoples Day, or, just a day off, whatever. But we do see them coming here well before Columbus does. So when we look at the different areas that they are going to make it, this is a map that just gives you a general idea of where the groups are going to make their way in. So if we trace the Norwegian, as we talked about, to Iceland, to Greenland, and eventually into Canada and Eastern North America, we could also look at the Norwegians also making their way to England, to Ireland, to France, and then eventually around to the Mediterranean to trade with the Italians and the Muslims. And then you have the Swedes who are going to come across the Baltic and make land in Eastern Europe and are going to make their way south from here, opening up a variety of kind of trade routes when we look at the different routes that they're going to take. So Constantinople, we talked about that yesterday when we were looking at the Crusades, this region right at the tip down here, where you see this red line, this red arrow pointing towards the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire. They're going to trade with them from the trade routes that they're going to establish across the landmass, but also through the Mediterranean. Eric the Red was a Viking who is going to create the new settlement in Greenland. Okay, so when we talk about like why is Iceland named Iceland even though it's green, and why is Greenland named Greenland even though it's like icy, those were the Vikings who decided on those terms and why they labeled them the way that they did. The Vikings, we talked about the first to reach America. They had settlements in Iceland in the 9th century. The French king, this is a fun story. So when the Vikings are going to make their way to France, like they are about to decimate the French king and the land, and the king makes a deal with a Viking duke. And so to stop this Viking duke from taking over and decimating the French king, the Viking duke is going to, the French king is going to give the Viking duke land, and he's going to name that land Normandy. And so why this is really kind of interesting is, one, the Vikings end up settling northern France, and so you get this like language mixture. And so when we look at like what does it mean to be French today, especially northern French, you see a language and cultural mixture that's going to establish here. That's a mixture between Norse culture and French culture. And where that becomes even more interesting later on in history is you're going to get in 1066 a war for the English throne. So the king, Edward the Confessor, is going to die, and there are 3 different people who lay claim to the throne of England, and they're going to fight over England. And one of those is going to be another Viking king, Harold Hardrada, the son-in-law or brother-in-law, of Edward the Confessor, named Harold Godwinson, and then the king of Normandy, William the Conqueror. And the 3 of them are going to fight for control in the kingdom of England, and William the Conqueror of Normandy wins. why this is interesting is when we look at what does it mean to be English and what does it mean to be British, you really have a country that was established by like the Romans who come up. You have the Vikings who established there. You have the Germans who later move in and lay claim to the throne and to the kingdom, and yet they speak French at the in the royal court in England. So you really have this mixture and this conglomeration of different peoples from different places conquering the land there. So it's really kind of interesting. And then we see the Vikings settling in the area that we know as Russia today, and they're going to call it Rus. And that's what they're going to give that land, the name they're going to give to that land when they land there. And so I told you earlier that Russia got its name from the Vikings. And so when we look at um, the influence that the Norse and the Vikings have, we can see the geographic impact very definitely. These places that are settled and the cultural and linguistic elements that they're going to establish there. And we could start to talk about more if we look at Norse mythology and we start talking about the gods and goddesses and where like Wednesday and Friday come from the names of Norse gods and goddesses. Like we can see a lot of cultural impacts of the Vikings on society simply because of their desire for more land. So again, as I said yesterday, when we look at the examples of the Europeans with exploration today, with the Vikings and their desire for land, or we look at the Mongols yesterday or the Crusades yesterday, it's important to understand that we are only looking at their impact through, or their push and pull factors through that one lens. The Vikings definitely wanted land, but I just gave you some cultural examples that they also pushed and pulled them to certain places. We could look at the economic impact and how they raided and stole from the churches. With European exploration, we looked at the economic, the desire for gold, but there's that cultural, the spread of the religion that we talked about as well. There's the political influence that the king and queen of Spain had just dominated, so they wanted more domination. So please understand as we walk away from this that the push and pull factors don't work in silos. They don't work independently from each other, that they often overlap, and there's often multiple motivating factors that eventually pushes somebody to leave their homeland. And as we talked about yesterday, like you just don't wake up one day and decide, I decide today that I want to go and move my whole family somewhere else halfway across the world and give up everything we've ever known. Like that's not the way it works. People, when they are finally pushed to leave, when they are going against their will, not the Vikings who are like leaving willingly to go find more land, but the people who are being forced out because of their invasions, like they're leaving because life has become so detrimental that their very safety, their very livelihood of their family and their future is in jeopardy. And so it does take a lot for people to finally make that move. But when they do, we see a lot of the lasting impact that each of these has had on our society today. The Mongol invasions, the European exploration, the Crusades, and the Vikings all having a huge influence on the way our society functions and where things come from today. Tomorrow, as I said earlier, we're going to focus more closely in on the European exploration, starting to investigate the political, economic, geographic, and social push and pull factors for the Europeans and their exploration specifically to the Americas. So we're going to do some research on that as we also focus in on the skill of ice, reviewing that. What did that look like? What do we remember about that from middle school or from English? And then what does that look like in a social studies class, a history class at North? And so if you are not going to be here tomorrow or Friday, please let me know because we are going to need to set up a separate time for you to get that lesson to make sure you're ready to go, because there will also be a practice ice as part of that lesson for you to get some feedback on. So please make sure to let me know if you're not going to be there. Please go ahead at this point, if you are done taking your notes, to go down to Google Classroom, and the question should have posted for you to respond to based on the notes from today. And as long as you get that done before the end of the period, then you have no homework. High five you. And just also a reminder that if you were wanting to do test revisions, that you need to set up a time with me tomorrow because Thursday is your last opportunity. I shouldn't say last. You can do them on Friday too, but you have a whole like what 20 minutes during your study hall, so not a lot of time. So you want to make sure to do those on Thursday during your lunch period, study hall period, or after school. So shoot me an email today if you know that you have a time period that you want to meet with me and you have not let me know yet, so that way I can be prepared for your presence. Okay, thanks, friends. Be good for the sub. Have a great evening. I will see you tomorrow.